The first thing I saw was not the mansion I had poured my life into building in the heart of downtown Cleveland, not the wide glass windows catching the late afternoon light falling over the Cuyahoga River, not the luxury, not the pride. It was a woman kneeling on the marble floor of that very house, scrubbing as if her bones had long given up the job of holding her upright. Before I tell you what happened next, let me introduce something important, something no one in this house seems to remember anymore. I am Brenda Kincaid, and this mansion used to be mine, before I gifted it to my daughter 15 years ago. But the woman scrubbing that floor? She did not resemble anyone who should have ever received such a gift from me. Her arms trembled with every scrub. Her shirt clung to her back, soaked in sweat. Her hair was loosely tied, hanging down as if no one in this house cared whether she still looked like a human being. The bucket beside her, gray, worn, the water inside, holding the color of a sorrow that had been fermenting for far too long. I stepped inside. The door clicked shut behind me. The alarm system chimed its familiar melody, then fell silent. A detail only someone who once lived in wealth would notice, something abusers never bother to care about. No one looked up. Not Omar Steele. The man stretched across my white sofa with the arrogance of someone who has never earned $1 in his life. Not Felicia Steele, his mother, sitting as if she owned the very air in the room. And the woman on the floor, she didn't look up either, at least not immediately. "Move the bucket," Felicia said, her tone as dull as if she were speaking to a fly. "You're letting water drip too close to my shoes." The woman flinched, hurriedly grabbed the bucket and shifted it, exactly 1 inch. Just 1 inch, as if she knew even the slightest mistake could cost her. And that was when she finally lifted her eyes to me. God, those eyes. Not tired, not stressed, but empty. Like someone had reached inside her and scraped out everything that once made her a person. My breath tightened in my throat, because those eyes belonged to my daughter. They belonged to Lyric Kincaid. My daughter said nothing. She did not gasp. She did not run to me, did not smile, did not cry. She only narrowed her eyes, just slightly, like she was trying to remember me from some faraway place, as if I were a name she once knew, but had been forced to forget, as if she were not allowed to recognize her own mother. Omar snapped his fingers, sharp, commanding, dripping with the entitlement of a man who lives by ordering others around. Lyric jolted so hard the mop fell from her hands, clattering against the floor with a cold metallic ring, and if you're still listening at this point, if that moment touches any part of your heart that knows what it's like to see your child reduced to that, leave a small heart in the comments. So I know I'm not standing alone in this memory. I had to close my eyes for a second, because my mind, like a reflex, pulled up another image. 15 years ago. This same room. But instead of the smell of disinfectant, I smelled vanilla cake rising in the oven. Lyric twirled around in her new heels, hair loose, smiling as bright as sunlight. She held the deed to the house in her hands. "Mom, I can't believe it! This house, it's mine!" I remember placing both hands on her shoulders. "Yes, baby. I worked in London so you could have a place to call home, a place no one can ever take from you." Lyric hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. The scent of coconut oil in her hair made me want to stay forever. But I didn't stay. I boarded a plane, flew back to London, and I naively believed that love could be sent through video calls and wire transfers. When I opened my eyes again, I saw the result of my absence right in front of me. I rolled my suitcase across the floor, the wheels carving sound through the heavy air. Only then did Felicia bother to glance at me. "Can we help you?" she asked, her tone as casual as if I were a delivery driver overstaying my welcome. Lyric's eyes clung to me, her breath shallow, her shoulders trembling as though even a breeze could knock her down. I saw her lips part, just slightly, as if a name, maybe Mom, was trying to escape. But then she shut her mouth, too afraid, too conditioned, too broken. 15 years of hard work in the UK, and this was what I returned to. Not prosperity, not pride, not the life I imagined for my daughter, but the sight of a woman, my daughter, scrubbing the floor of a house she owned, and two people sitting above her, believing I would walk in quietly, leave quietly, believing the woman kneeling belonged to them. My fingers tightened around my phone. No shaking, no doubt, only cold, focused purpose. I walked to the large window, where the signal was strongest, turned so all three of them could see me, and dialed the only number I needed in that moment. When the line connected, I didn't need a deep breath. I simply said, "Clear and cutting. Open the contingency file." If you think this moment already hurts enough, wait until my lawyer arrives in the next part. What Omar and Felicia are hiding in this house does not stop at my daughter. Trust me, you'll want to stay until the end. But before I tell you what happened next in that room, I need to take you back 15 years, because you must understand one thing clearly. I did not leave America because I was a bad mother. I left because I was a mother desperate to save her daughter from a future I knew would never be enough if I stayed still. We lived in Glenville, a modest black community on the east side of Cleveland. Our small rental house sat on a street where, every winter, the wind off Lake Erie pushed through the window cracks as if trying to force us out. Back then, Lyric was 18, freshly graduated, her diploma wrapped with a shiny gold ribbon. She carried a dream far bigger than the old kitchen where we sat together, opening her own hair salon. "Mom, I'm going to call it Kincaid and Curls," Lyric said that night, tapping a pencil on the chipped table. "I'll have purple chairs, mirrors with lights, and I'll teach little girls how to do their own hair." I looked at her, those eyes overflowing with hope and youth, and inside me rose two conflicting feelings, a bright, swelling pride and a slow, aching pain, because I knew that with my janitor's wage, that vibrant purple dream would take years to become real. Then the phone rang. A former co-worker, her voice swallowed by airport noise. "Brenda, London is hiring a cleaning manager. The pay is triple what you make now." Triple. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, listening to Lyric breathing from the next room. I calculated every dollar, every year, every possibility. 5 years in London, 5 years saving every penny, 5 years, and I could buy my daughter a house, a salon, a way out. But 5 years became 10, then 15. And if you think that choice was easy, you've never been a mother standing at two roads, one close but poor, one far but capable of giving your child an entire life. Stay with me, because from this moment, everything begins to turn in a direction I never imagined. "You're not leaving, right, Mom?" Lyric stood at the airport security gate, her eyes red since the moment we left home. I hugged her tight, breathing in that familiar coconut oil scent, memorizing it like a photograph I never wanted to fade. "I have to go, baby, but not for long. When I come back, you'll have a house, a place of your own. I promise." Lyric nodded, burying her face into my shoulder. "I love you, Mom. I love you too, more than my own life." I had no idea. That would be the last embrace I'd ever have from the carefree version of Lyric, the one overflowing with future. The first 3 years, we called each other every day. FaceTime, texts, emails, a thread pulling us together across the ocean. Lyric told me about her hairstyling course, about her first client, about saving every tip with the joy of someone building her future. And then, Omar Steele appeared. I still remember the video call that day. "Mom, I have good news!" Lyric was glowing, her cheeks flushed with a light only love could create. "I met someone. His name is Omar. Omar Steele. He's really good to me, Mom. He carried my boxes up from the car. He holds the door for me. He even told me I'm beautiful, even when I haven't done my hair." I smiled through the screen, but something tightened in my gut. "What do you know about him so far? his family, work. He lives with his mom, Mrs. Felicia. She raised him alone, like you raised me. He's looking for opportunities, but he's really smart, Mom. He said he'll help me open my salon. Looking for opportunities. That was always the phrase women used when they didn't want to admit their man didn't have a job. But I didn't say it. I didn't dare. I was half a world away, and Lyric sounded happier than she had in years. 6 months later, Omar moved into her apartment. Mom, he helps me save on rent. He cooks for me. He takes care of me. On video, I saw Omar sitting on the sofa behind her. A tall man with deep brown skin, a confident smile, and a gleaming watch on his wrist. The kind that didn't match someone looking for opportunities. "Hello, Mrs. Kincaid," he waved. "I'm taking very good care of her. Don't worry." But the way he said her, as if Lyric was his possession, made my spine stiffen. They married in a small ceremony in Glenville. I could only take 3 days off to attend. My daughter looked breathtaking in her simple white dress. But when I hugged her before the ceremony, something strange crept between us. "Are you sure, baby?" I whispered. Lyric nodded too quickly. "Mom, he loves me. He says he'll never leave me alone like..." She hesitated. "Like the way I was alone when you left." That sentence stabbed me like a knife without a handle. You were never alone, Lyric. I worked for you. I know. She smiled, but the smile never reached her eyes. I know you love me. But I wasn't there, and Omar was. Then our calls began to change. Mom, he's just stressed. He's trying to find a job, but no one's hiring. Does he yell at you? No, not much. He just gets irritated. Men need to feel like they're providing, Mom. Then the small changes crept in like shadows no one notices at first. Lyric no longer wore the gold earrings I gave her. I lost them, Mom. She cut her hair short. He likes it this way. She stopped talking about opening a salon. We're saving for other things. 8 years of working double shifts in London, no holidays, no birthdays, no Christmas, and finally, I did what I promised. I bought a house in downtown Cleveland, near the park, near the river. 4 bedrooms, wooden floors, big glass windows. This is yours, Lyric, I said, my hands shaking as I held the deed. I put your name on it. This is your foundation. You can open your salon. You can live the life you want. Lyric burst into tears. Mom, you did this for me? Yes, baby. This is my life savings for you. But I didn't know Omar was standing just outside the frame, and from that moment, the gears in his mind began to turn. If this story makes you want to walk through the screen to protect someone, stay. Because this is where the darkness truly begins to seep into my daughter's life. Back to the present. Lyric looked at me like someone waking up in a stranger's house. Her eyes moved across my face slowly, as if she were trying to assemble my features into a name torn out of her memory. I ended the call, slipped my phone into my pocket, and never looked away from her. The last words I said on that call seemed to hang in the air, like a warning only I understood. I set my suitcase against the wall and stepped toward her, slow and gentle, like approaching a wounded animal that might flee, or break if touched too roughly. She still held the mop. Water dripped around her knees onto the cold tile. I stopped in front of her and crouched down. My joints screamed, but I didn't show it. Lyric, I whispered. Her name felt strange on my tongue, something I had repeated thousands of times in hotel rooms, airports, office hallways, now echoing in the wrong place. Lyric flinched. Not the startled type of flinch, but the flinch of someone who has learned that certain sounds lead directly to pain. She tightened her grip on the mop handle, lowered her head, didn't dare look at me. Behind her, Felicia let out a dry, mocking chuckle. She's tired, she said, her voice as cold as perfume sprayed onto a trash can. She likes keeping busy. Don't mind her." That laugh stabbed into my chest like a splinter of wood. I kept my attention on Lyric. Up close, the cruel details sharpened. The dry, cracked skin around her mouth, the tight corners of her lips from clenching her teeth. Lines of exhaustion, far too old for her age. A stray hair stuck to her sweat-damp neck. I raised my hand slowly, not touching her, just hovering in the space between us. "Look at me, sweetheart," I murmured. Sweetheart slipped out before I could stop it. 15 years apart isn't enough to erase a mother's instinct. Lyric's shoulders twitched. She looked at me, just for a heartbeat, like eye contact itself was an act of rebellion she might be punished for. And then I saw it, yellowing along her jaw, a bruise on her forearm where her sleeve had ridden up, a large purple mark near her wrist, oval-shaped, ugly, fresh. Older ones beneath it, faded, layered like a history someone tried to erase but couldn't. My heart cracked, but it did not break with despair. It cracked with sharpness. "That's enough cleaning," Omar said from the sofa, his tone flat. "You're making the floor too wet." He spoke about his wife as if she were faulty equipment. Lyric didn't respond. She pushed the mop into the bucket, her hand trembling just enough for me to see. Water splashed. Felicia grimaced as if offended, but didn't bother to move her feet. I stepped closer, close enough to smell the cheap cleaning chemicals mixed with the sweat soaked into Lyric's shirt. "Lyric," I said again, my voice lower this time. "It's Mom." Her eyes blinked. 1 second. 2. Then dropped again. A flash crossed her face. Pain, shame, and something like an apology. Her breath caught. Her jaw tightened around words that wouldn't come out. I saw the war inside her, the instinct to recognize her mother, and the terror of what it would cost her if she did. If you've ever watched someone you love swallow the truth just to survive, leave a small heart. So I know I'm not speaking into emptiness. "Don't distract her," Felicia said, stretching her legs as if marking territory. "She gets slower when someone watches her." Omar glanced over, impatient. "You heard my mother. Finish up and put the bucket back where it belongs." His mother. The words slammed against my chest. Lyric tugged her sleeve down to cover the bruise, the movement so fast I knew she had practiced it thousands of times. Our eyes met once more. This time she held the gaze a heartbeat longer. No welcome, just fear, and an unspoken apology. Finally she whispered, hoarse, thin, as if her voice had been worn down from repeating one sentence too many times. "I'm sorry. Please don't get me in trouble." I rose from beside Lyric and turned fully toward the sofa set, the place where two people were leisurely enjoying a life they had never built. Omar was sprawled out like a self-made king, one arm thrown over the back of the couch, the other holding the remote, his legs spread wide, taking up all the space, as if the room itself existed to serve him. Felicia sat with her legs crossed, robe loosely tied, chin tipped up, as if even the air in the house answered to her. I had seen them like this before, just through a screen. In the first years when Lyric still sent me pictures to England, they were always at the edge of the frame, the far end of the sofa, a corner of the backyard, next to the grill. Felicia with her tilted head full of disdain. Omar with the same lazy slouch he had now. Back then, I would zoom in on my phone screen in a London hotel room, in my rented flat in Manchester, telling myself, I'll come back and meet them properly when work calms down. Now here I was, standing just a few steps away, and both of them were behaving as if I were some stranger who'd wandered in by mistake. No one moved when I walked closer. They didn't get up, didn't call my name, didn't offer even a single greeting to the person who had paid for every brick in this house. Eventually, Omar did turn off the TV, not because of me, but because he wanted quiet. "Have you stared enough?" he asked, his eyes glancing over me like I was an annoying bill he had to deal with. Felicia tightened her robe, adjusting the belt. The rings on her fingers caught the light. I recognized the pattern on one bracelet. It was the exact model Lyric and I once saw in a catalog years ago, the one she had laughed at and said, "So pretty, but that's for rich ladies." Now it rested on Felicia's wrist. My stomach sank. I let my eyes sweep around the living room, sofa cushions sunken in the way only long-term use can shape them, an unfamiliar pair of slippers under the coffee table, a folded blanket draped over the back of a chair, signs of residents, not guests. And Lyric? My daughter's presence was reduced to a bucket of water by the door and streaks of wet on the tile. She stood pressed to one side, head down, clutching the mop handle like it was a cracked shield. Looking closer, I saw it. Shoulders collapsing forward as if someone were pressing down on them, arms held close to her sides, dark circles under her eyes, the kind that belong to people who only ever sleep in snatches. No one becomes like that overnight. It takes time and neglect to wear a person down to that degree. "What is it you need?" Felicia finally spoke, her voice sweet but cold. "We don't accept drop-in visitors. If it's about the house, talk to Omar." She spoke of the house as if it were some joint asset they managed together, not a gift I had placed directly into my daughter's hands. I pressed my lips together, feeling the full weight of 15 years. Foreign contracts, connecting flights, all the times I soothed myself with the thought that my child was safe in a house I'd paid for. "I know every inch of this property," I replied, my voice low. "I'm the one who signed the papers." Omar snorted, not quite a laugh, but full of contempt. "That was 15 years ago," he shrugged. "Things are different now. People grow, people move on. She gave us the house. You stayed away too long." He jerked his chin in Lyric's direction without even looking at her. Lyric's fingers tightened so hard around the mop handle, her knuckles went white. But she didn't say no. She just bowed her head even lower. Her silence was thick and trained. He wanted me to hear it clearly. My absence was his excuse for what he'd taken. I let the first wave of guilt crash over me, and then I let it roll away. I had my own debt to Lyric, but I wasn't about to let him turn my mistake into his license. I looked at my daughter one more time, the way her body was half turned toward him, like a dog constantly awaiting its next command. Then I turned back and faced Omar and Felicia head-on. When I finally spoke, my voice came out soft enough that they had to lean in slightly to hear. "Did Lyric give you the house willingly, or did you take it from her?" If you've ever seen someone who believes they can redefine reality simply by talking loud enough, stay with me. From this point on, the paperwork will start speaking for itself. The corner of Omar's mouth curled into a slow, mirthless smile. He didn't answer right away. Men like Omar enjoy the pause. They like silence to make their next move feel like a finishing blow. He leaned forward, set the remote neatly on the glass table, then stood up with the easy grace of someone who has never had to clean a single stain in this house himself. "You want to talk about the difference between giving and taking, right?" he said. "Fine." He smoothed his shirt as if preparing a presentation, not defending himself against an accusation of theft. Then he walked right past me, deliberately close enough for his shoulder to brush mine. A small collision, but the message was clear. "I'm not afraid of you." He opened the built-in cabinet where I used to keep family photo albums and my best table linens. Now it held nothing but stacks of files and a metal lockbox. Omar pulled the box out and set it on the cabinet. The sound of metal against wood rang out sharp and dry. Lyric flinched. Her hands tightened on the mop again. Felicia watched with the look of someone who had seen this act more than once. Omar pulled a key from his pocket and unlocked the box. The click echoed in the too-quiet room. He rummaged for a few seconds, then pulled out a worn manila folder. "You don't have to take my word for it," he said, smug. "We did everything by the book." He set the folder on the glass table and nudged it toward me. "Go ahead. You like signing things. I'm sure you'll appreciate paperwork." I didn't touch it immediately. I looked at him first, his posture too straight, shoulders pulled back, chin lifted. This was clearly the scene he'd been waiting to perform. At last, I opened the folder. The first page was a photocopy of the transfer deed. My eyes skimmed quickly. The header, the address of the house I knew by heart, then down to the bottom, where the signatures were. I stopped at Lyric's name. The letters were the same, but the way they sat on the line was completely wrong. Lyric's signature used to be round, even, smooth, her strokes firm. The signature on this page trembled. The first letter lunged forward, then dropped. The following letters crowded together, clinging to the edge of the line. The ink broke in places, dark in some strokes and pale in others, the trail of a hand that hesitated, a hand forced to complete the motion. This was not the signature of a woman sitting calmly at the kitchen table, thinking it over before signing. This was the mark of someone afraid. Below it sat a neat, perfectly round notary seal, the kind that makes people stop asking questions. I checked the date. It was the exact week Lyric had gone quiet on me that year. No FaceTime, no texts, no emails. Back then, I'd told myself, she's busy. Marriage, work, life swept her up. Now, standing in this room, I understood. That was the week someone had put a pen into my daughter's hand. If you've ever looked at a sheet of paper that said out loud what someone's mouth was too scared to say, you'll know what it feels like to see fear inside a signature instead of choice. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I kept my eyes on Omar as I pulled it out to check. A message from my lawyer. "I'm 10 minutes away. Don't leave." I closed the folder and laid it back on the table as if it could stain my hands if I held it any longer. 10 minutes. That was enough time for the truth to start being called by its proper name before anyone could write the narrative for me. I slid the phone back into my pocket and turned to Lyric. She was still pressed against the wall, eyes fixed on the puddles on the floor, as if she wanted to disappear into them. "Come with me," I said softly. I didn't ask permission. I walked over and touched her elbow lightly, as if I were touching a delicate glass that could crack at any moment. Her skin burned under my fingers, far too hot for someone who'd just been mopping floors. She flinched, but didn't pull away. I guided her toward the corner of the room, away from the sofa, away from the cabinet with the lockbox. Felicia huffed in annoyance but stayed seated. Omar sank back into the couch, eyes flicking toward the blank TV screen, as if none of this concerned him. In the corner, the light shifted. Half of us in shadow, half in the sunlight streaming through the glass. Close enough that they could still see if they wanted to. Far enough that they could pretend they didn't quite hear. I turned my back, shielding Lyric from their line of sight. "Your body's burning up," I whispered. "How long have you been sick?" Lyric pressed her lips together. After a moment, her shoulders sagged, a small act of surrender. "Worst was last year," she rasped. "Fever, coughing, standing too long made me dizzy. I couldn't keep up." Her eyes darted around the room, then dropped back to the floor. "That's when he took the papers." "What papers?" I asked, though I already knew. "The house papers." Her fingers tapped lightly against the mop handle. "He said he needed to keep them safe. I was so weak I couldn't argue. I was lying on the couch. He stood over me with a pen. He said if anything happened to him, I'd have nothing if I didn't transfer everything." She swallowed with difficulty. "I said we should wait for you. He said you'd gone off to live your new life, and I needed to stop acting like a child waiting for my mom to come fix everything." "So you signed," I said, not waiting for her nod. Her eyes filled with water. He grabbed my wrist, shoved the pen into my hand, told me if I loved him, I should prove it. I felt my heart crack in a different way, cold and sharp. "And the floors?" I kept my voice steady. "Why are you this exhausted?" Color climbed up her neck. "He doesn't like seeing streaks. If the floor isn't shiny when he gets up, he goes silent for days, or slams doors, stomps around. Sometimes he throws dishes into the sink for me to rewash. It's easier if I just keep everything spotless. So I hardly sleep. I just get it done. Keep the peace. 3 truths lay in the air between us. He took the documents while my daughter was sick. He threatened to put her out on the street. He turned her nights into unpaid shifts just to keep his temper quiet. I placed my hand on her arm. You're not crazy. You're not weak. You've been cornered. Her eyes shimmered, but she stayed silent, as if she feared that even breaking down in tears would be punishable. Right then, I heard heavy, deliberate footsteps behind me. Not the normal sound of walking, but the stomping of a man who had just realized his wife had been allowed to speak longer than he wanted. And I knew the matter of paperwork was only just beginning. His boots hadn't even finished crossing the last tile when his hand shoved itself between my daughter and me. Omar didn't ask, didn't clear his throat, didn't give a word of warning. He simply reached out and tore the mop handle from Lyric's hands with a twist so hard she stumbled, almost falling. The dripping mop head smacked against the rim of the bucket, sending a splash of dirty water across her bare ankles. "Break time's over," he said, still not bothering to glance at me. "You're making the floor too wet." His voice was flat, the kind of tone you only perfect after saying the same line over and over. He talked about Lyric the way you talk about a tool in your hand, as if she had no ears, no opinions, no name of her own. Lyric didn't argue, didn't defend herself. She just pushed the mop head back into the bucket, her fingers trembling so slightly that if I hadn't been standing this close, I might have missed it. The water rose and swirled in circles, like her whole life was doing the same. Felicia clicked her tongue in irritation when more water splashed, but she still didn't bother moving her feet off the rug. I shifted half a step closer to my daughter, close enough to smell the blend of cheap cleaning solution and sweat soaked into her clothes, scent that belonged not to a homeowner, but to hired help. "Lyric," I called again, this time even lower. "It's Mom." Her eyes flicked up for a split second, then darted away. In that brief moment, I saw it all. The pain, the shame, a tangle of emotions too knotted to name. Her breath snagged in her chest. The muscles in her throat tightened as if they were trying to push a word out. But in the end, only silence emerged. I could see the war inside her, between the instinct to rush forward and say Mom, like she used to, and the very real fear of what it would cost her to acknowledge me in front of Omar and Felicia. If you're still listening and you've ever watched someone you love swallow their own truth just to make it through the day, leave a small heart in the comments, so I know I am not the only one who has ever stood and watched like this in a dark room, because the very moment Lyric couldn't bring herself to call me Mom in front of them, I understood. This wasn't just about me being gone for 15 years. This was about who had taught my daughter to be afraid of me. And trust me, from this point on, Omar will wish he had stopped at complaining about the floor being too wet. "Don't distract her," Felicia cut in, lazily stretching her legs, her toes nearly touching the still damp streak of water. She slows down whenever someone looms over her like that. The way she said "someone" was so cold she didn't need to raise her voice. Omar shot me a quick glance, just long enough for his annoyance to leak through the mask of calm. "You heard my mother," he said flatly. "Finish up and put the bucket back where it belongs." His mother. Those 3 words slammed into my chest like a stone. The woman lounging on my sofa was Mother, in the very house I had bought so my child could have a place to call home. I didn't argue with that, not yet. Instead, I watched Lyric's hand. She tugged her sleeve down over the bruise on her wrist in a movement so fast and practiced that I knew she'd rehearsed it thousands of times. In the mirror, in the hallway, in doorways where someone might accidentally see. Her eyes locked with mine for one heartbeat. This time, she held the gaze a fraction longer. But there was still no smile, no relief, only fear, and something that looked painfully like an apology. Lyric's lips parted, as if she were about to say something, When her voice finally emerged, it was hoarse, raw, paper-thin, the voice of someone who has worn down their throat for years, saying only one kind of sentence. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry," she whispered, the words splintering as soon as they left her tongue. "Please, don't get me in trouble." And that was when I understood. In the house I had bought with my own hands, my daughter was apologizing to me for daring to stand near her mother too long. I rose from my seat beside Lyric and turned fully toward the sofa, toward the two people occupying a life they had done nothing to build. Omar lay there like a self-appointed king. Felicia sat with her legs crossed, robe loosely tied, chin tilted, as if the air in the house bent to her will. My eyes swept the room. The sunken cushions, the neatly placed slippers under the table, the blanket folded at the corner of the sofa, all signs of people living here, not just passing through. And my daughter's presence? Just the bucket of water and a long, wet streak on the floor. "Is there something you need?" Felicia asked, her voice still smooth, but steel-cold beneath. "I know this house very well," I answered, my tone low. "I'm the one who signed the papers." Omar snorted. "That was 15 years ago. Everything's changed." My fingers tightened around my phone, not shaking, not hesitant, just the steadiness of someone who has already made up her mind. I walked toward the big window, turned so they could hear every word, and spoke into the phone. "I'm 5 minutes away. Bring the police." The knocking hit the door, heavy and firm, reverberating through the walls. Omar froze. Felicia twisted around, her mouth pressing into a tight line. Lyric barely moved, but I felt her breath catch right behind me. "Who's that?" Felicia muttered. "We're not expecting anyone." Omar hesitated for just a beat, long enough to show how much he hated surprises, then rolled his shoulders back and headed for the hallway. The knocking came again, louder this time. The front door opened. A deep male voice, steady and clipped each word. "Good afternoon. Cuyahoga County Sheriff's Office. We're here to speak with Mr. Omar Steele and Ms. Felicia Steele." The voice wasn't loud, wasn't aggressive, and that made it all the more dangerous. Men who wear badges and stay calm never show up without a reason. I moved closer to the hallway, stopping just short of being fully in view. From there, I saw enough. 2 deputies standing on the front step, sharp uniforms, clean boots, hats pulled low. One of them holding a stack of sealed white envelopes, the other with a small notebook tucked into his chest pocket. The air in the house changed instantly. Heavier, but somehow cleaner. "That's me," Omar said, bracing a hand on the doorframe. "And this is my mother." Felicia hovered just behind him, tension written all over her. "What is this about?" she cut in. "We haven't done anything. This must be a mistake." The closer deputy glanced at her, then turned back to Omar. "We'll explain," he said, "but we do need to come inside. This concerns the residents." Just the phrase, "the residents," made Omar's spine stiffen. He did not like being placed in the position of being examined. His jaw clenched. "You can say it right here," Omar replied. "My wife doesn't like strangers in the house." I stepped forward, standing tall in the doorway like a statement. "Let them in. This is my house, and I need to hear what they're about to say." One deputy's eyes shifted to me, sharp, assessing, taking in every detail in the room. The suitcase by the wall, the bucket of water. Lyric pressed into the corner, Felicia's robe, Lyric's clenched hands. He didn't show surprise, but I could tell he was already arranging the pieces in his mind. If you're listening, and you've ever watched authority walk into a room where someone believed they would never be challenged, drop a small heart below. I know that feeling, terrified and relieved so intensely it almost chokes you. Omar shot me a glare like a blade, but he still had to step aside. His pride only carried him so far when uniforms walked in. The 2 deputies entered. The taller one closed the door behind them, then turned so he faced all of us at once. "Mr. Steele, Ms. Steele," he began, nodding in order, first at Omar, then at Felicia. We're here to serve a court order issued this afternoon by the county." Felicia's hand clamped down on Omar's arm. "I told you!" she burst out. "We haven't done anything wrong. We pay our taxes. We live quietly." "Ma'am," the deputy said evenly, "you'll have the chance to explain. Right now, our duty is to present this order and make sure you understand what it means." He opened the top envelope and pulled out a document, still not handing it over, reading first. "This order temporarily freezes all actions related to property and residency at this address," he read, each word clear. "It also initiates an investigation into possible coercion, intimidation, and forced labor that may have occurred in this home." Every word hit the floor like a stone. Lyric's head snapped up. Her eyes went wide, confusion and terror battling for space. Felicia's mouth dropped open, then shut, then dropped again like a fish out of water. "Forced labor?" she sputtered. "Ridiculous! She's family!" The deputy's gaze flicked to Lyric. Just for a second. But even that was enough. "We're not here to argue," he said. "We're here to ensure there will be no change in ownership or residency until the investigation is complete. No sale, no transfer, no one being put out of this house." Omar's eyes cut to me. A shadow flashed across his face, dark and dangerous. The second deputy stepped forward and held the document out to them. "Both your names are on the order," he said. "We're required to read it and confirm you've received it." Omar snatched the paper and scanned it too fast to truly comprehend anything. His nostrils flared. Felicia clung to his arm, trying to read along. Her nails dug so hard into his skin that his knuckles went pale. "Who started this?" she snapped. "Who told you something was wrong in our house?" The deputies didn't answer. They didn't need to. Their silence was the answer. I stood at the threshold, arms loosely folded, my heartbeat as steady as stone. This was only the first crack, but it was a deep one. Omar finally lifted his head from the stack of papers, his calm facade gone. His eyes narrowed, hot and dark with threat. "You think a few pieces of paper are going to change anything?" he snarled. The sound of a car door slamming outside echoed through the yard. Then the doorbell rang once, sharp as a blade. One of the deputies looked at me. "Are you expecting someone, ma'am?" "Yes," I answered, my eyes still locked on Omar. "My lawyer." Omar scoffed, and Felicia pulled her robe tighter across her chest. "This is an attack on our family," she said, full of wounded pride. My lawyer walked in, the steady posture of a man used to entering rooms everyone else is afraid of. Navy suit, worn leather briefcase, silver at his temples. He nodded to me, then went straight to the table, opened his case, and pulled out a much thicker file. Original ownership documents, my signature, everything organized by year. Omar tried to sound dismissive. More baseless accusations. My lawyer didn't bother looking at him. He addressed the deputies instead. "These are the full purchase documents, and this," he tapped another section, "is the contingency agreement Ms. Kincaid and I drafted before she left Georgia." The deputies stepped closer. Felicia strained to read, as if she could stare the words into becoming something that favored her. "The house is in Omar's name now," she said. "That's all that matters." My lawyer placed the papers Omar had produced next to the originals, 2 different stories lying side by side. "What matters is which documents are lawful," he said. "This property was bought with Ms. Kincaid's money. She transferred it to her daughter, and we specified conditions." He pulled up a page. "Any transfer carried out under threat, coercion, or abuse, physical or psychological, is void, and the asset reverts to its prior state pending investigation." The room went silent. The deputies wrote. Felicia went pale. Omar pressed his lips together until they turned white. Omar shot to his feet. "She's fine. Don't throw the word coercion around in my house." My lawyer stayed calm, but there was steel in his voice now. "We have documented injuries, witness testimony, a suspicious signature pattern, and indications of non-consensual confinement." He turned to the deputies. We now need to speak to Lyric, alone, and we need to see where she sleeps. Lyric froze at that. Her eyes flicked toward the hallway, then to Omar, like someone trapped between two doors. She sleeps with us, Omar growled, like any normal married couple. The deputy tilted his head. In that case, showing us will only take a moment. His gaze returned to Lyric. You don't have to lie for anyone. Show us where you really sleep. Something unlatched inside Lyric. She nodded. She set the mop down and led the way down the hall. She did not turn into the master bedroom, its bed perfectly made, without the slightest sign of use. I don't sleep there, she whispered. She walked farther, toward the utility area, where the washer sat, the storage cabinets, and the cramped space under the stairs that once held Christmas decorations. She stopped at a narrow door. Her hand shook as she turned the knob. The door opened with a creak. The smell of damp hit us before the hallway light could seep in. Inside was a cramped cubby, just big enough to stand in. No window, no light, just a thin mattress with frayed edges, a rumpled blanket, a plastic bucket, a crooked sliver of shelving, old t-shirts, a toothbrush and a chipped ceramic cup. No books, no photos, no sign of a life being lived. You sleep here? Lyric nodded. Sometimes I get to sleep on the couch if I finish everything, she said, her voice nearly flat. She listed it out. Floors, ironing, kitchen, whatever they want. If I'm slow, he says I don't deserve a soft bed. Omar cut in. It's just a storage room. She only crashed there a few nights when she was sick. The deputy lifted his hand to his radio. Unit 12, requesting supervisory presence. We have a family situation with indications of abuse and sleeping conditions not appropriate for a spouse. Felicia gasped for air. Everything is being twisted. She likes being down there. The supervisor arrived without fanfare, but the air in the house shifted completely. He was older than the two deputies, the wrinkles at the corners of his eyes telling me he'd heard the phrase, "We didn't do anything wrong," more times than I'd flown out of the States. He didn't shout, didn't bark orders. He carried a quiet authority that settled over the room like new weather. He listened while Unit 12 summarized. The bruises on Lyric's body, the bedroom under the stairs, the contingency documents, the court order. His eyes moved from face to face, me, Lyric, Omar, Felicia, as if laying us out on an invisible table in his mind. Then he said 6 words that changed everything. We're going to separate everyone now. Felicia went rigid, clutching her chest. Separate? What do you mean? This is our home. We have nothing to hide. Omar snorted, jaw clenching tighter. You're turning a marriage into a crime scene. The supervisor didn't argue. He simply assigned positions, fast and clean. One deputy led Lyric to the dining area, away from the storage closet, yawning open like a wound. I was asked to sit at the far end of the sofa. Omar was held near the door. Felicia was placed in a corner chair. He started with Lyric. From where I sat, I could only see her back, her hands twisting together in her lap. His voice was low and even. I heard snatches of it. Has anyone ever threatened you? When did you sign? Who was there? What happened right before you wrote your name? Lyric's answers stumbled, but they still came. He said if I didn't sign, I'd be on the street. He took the papers when I could barely stand. He stood over me, yelling. I just wanted him to be quiet. The supervisor took notes, looked up, asked her to clarify details, then wrote some more. He treated my daughter's words like evidence, not women's drama. If you've ever sat there listening as someone you love finally tells the truth about what happened behind closed doors and felt both proud and sick at the same time, leave me a small heart below so I know you understand that feeling. Then it was Felicia's turn. She's always dramatic, Felicia said, voice shrill. A bruise is from bumping a table. She's sensitive. She's emotional. Have you ever seen your son put his hands on her? The supervisor asked. Felicia hesitated for a beat. Not in any unusual way. A man sometimes has to remind his wife of her responsibilities. That's marriage. His pen paused for half a heartbeat, then moved again. Then he came to me. I'll need your account, from the moment you walked into the house until now. Only what you saw and heard, he said. And I told him. Lyric on her knees scrubbing the floor when I opened the door, Omar snapping his fingers, the mop clattering to the tile, the shaky signature on the transfer papers, my daughter's skin burning under my hand, the whispers in the corner about documents taken while she lay feverish on the couch, the nights she didn't sleep because the floor had to shine. I didn't exaggerate, and I didn't soften. I gave him only what belonged to the truth, not to my imagination. When I finished, he nodded and closed his notebook. What you've described matches our observations, he said. We'll be sending your daughter for a medical evaluation. Her current condition is concerning. What happens now? I asked. Now we lock things down, he replied. No changing deeds, no moving money, no removing her from this residence without our knowledge. He added that the Financial Crimes Unit was already combing through assets and accounts. When money smells wrong, they move fast, he said. A little while later, a younger deputy came in, still slightly out of breath. Financial Crimes just called back, he said. They found something I think you'll want to hear. We all moved back toward the living room. Lyric perched on the edge of the chair, arms wrapped around her waist. Felicia leaned against the wall, mascara smeared. My lawyer still stood by the coffee table, documents neatly stacked. Go ahead, the supervisor prompted. We ran the past 5 years of records, the deputy said, starting with assets tied to Ms. Kincaid and transfers involving that property. The salon on Euclid, Kincaid and Curls, came up quickly. My chest tightened at the name. The business was sold 4 years ago. The bill of sale lists your daughter as the seller, and the amount isn't small. The signature matches hers. After that, the funds were transferred into a joint account held by Lyric and Felicia Steele. Every gaze swung toward Felicia. I was just helping her manage it, she jumped in. She's not good with numbers. She asked me to. 3 days later, the deputy continued, most of that money was moved into another account, labeled Medical Fund, with the description, Cancer Treatment for Felicia Steele. My throat burned. I heard Lyric's old voice in my head. Felicia's sick, Mom. They say it's cancer. We checked the hospital listed in the memo, the deputy said. There's no record of a Felicia Steele being treated for cancer there. No admission, no scans, no outpatient records that match the dates or amounts. The room tilted for a beat. We also cross-checked nearby clinics and specialists. So far, no medical trail that explains that cancer treatment note. The lie sat naked in the middle of the room. Not every illness goes through insurance, Felicia shouted. We paid in cash. Private doctor. You don't know everything about my body. We'll request invoices, prescriptions, any medical paperwork, the supervisor replied coolly. Right now, what we see is the sale of a business, money moved, and absolutely no valid medical documentation. My lawyer turned to Lyric, his voice gentle but sharp. Lyric, you sold the salon because you believed Felicia had cancer, didn't you? Her whole body trembled. She said she was dying, Lyric whispered. She said insurance wouldn't cover everything, that she didn't want to be a burden on Omar. She cried. She said if I didn't help, God wouldn't forgive me. Her voice began to crack. She told me not to call you, said you were busy, that you had a new life, that this was my chance to sacrifice the way you once did. So, I signed. I sold the salon, sold the gift you gave me, to save her. My heart clenched with every word, not because of my daughter, but because of the people who had used her love against her. The supervisor took a slow breath, then turned to Omar, now brought back inside, wrists cuffed in front of him. Given the physical evidence, the testimony, the exploitation of a fabricated medical condition to obtain money, along with the coercive conduct in this home, he said, his voice deep and final. "We're no longer in the realm of suspicions." He nodded to the deputies. "Place him under arrest." Everything happened quickly after that. The cuffs clicked tighter around Omar's wrists. He jerked, but there was nowhere to go. "For what? For taking care of what your daughter walked away from?" he shouted. "For suspected domestic abuse, fraud, and financial exploitation," the supervisor answered. "You'll have access to an attorney. Right now, you're coming with us." As they led him past Lyric, Omar whipped his head toward her, eyes blazing. "You did this! You and your saint of a mother!" Lyric recoiled like she'd been slapped. I stepped between them. "No," I said calm. "You did this the day you forgot she was a human being, not your property." Felicia lunged after them, clawing for her son's arm. "You can't treat my boy like a criminal. He's a good man. We are a family." The supervisor turned to her. "Ma'am, based on what we've found so far, you're also being detained for questioning on fraud and as a potential accomplice in financial exploitation." When the second set of cuffs locked around her wrists, Felicia went still. She started repeating one sentence over and over. "I'm sick. I'm sick." But no one believed her anymore. They were led across the front lawn and into two separate patrol cars. Neighbors lined the sidewalk, curtains twitched, a few phones were raised. If you've ever watched someone who thought they were untouchable being taken away in handcuffs in front of the people next door, you know that strange feeling, justice and a new kind of sorrow at the same time. If you know that feeling, leave a small heart, so I know you're still here with me. Lyric stood just behind me, fingers gripping the doorframe. "They're really gone," she whispered. "They're really being taken away." "For now," I said, "but they'll hire lawyers. They'll try to twist everything. They'll fight to reclaim what they stole." "What if they come back? If he gets out, he'll be furious. If they find another way to take everything. I don't have the salon anymore. I don't have—" Her voice broke. I turned to face her fully. Behind us, the house lay quiet, as if it were waiting to be redefined. I pulled the softened contingency folder from my pocket, the one aged at the edges by time, and placed it in her hands. "What's this?" she asked softly. "Insurance," I said. "Not the kind they sell over the phone, the kind a mother writes when she knows she can't be in two places at once." I pressed the folder gently into her grip. "Your name is in there. My name. Every signature. Every clause. Every layer of protection I built into this house is sitting in your hands." Her fingers tightened around the cardboard, and in her eyes something began to rise up through all the fear. Something that looked very much like hope. "But what if that still isn't enough?" she whispered. "What if they find another way?" I stepped closer, close enough to see my reflection in her eyes, older, more tired, but still standing. "Sweetheart," I said, my voice firm again. "This house has always been yours. They just thought you were alone." I paused. "But you never were." It was almost dark by the time she stood in front of that door. The master bedroom had always been at the end of the hallway since this house was built, but to Lyric, it might as well have been a foreign country she'd never been granted a passport to. Her bare feet stopped right at the line where the hallway tile met the bedroom carpet, as if crossing it would wake a ghost. The deputies were gone. The cruisers had pulled away. The house was quiet in a way I had never heard it before. No TV, no shouting, no heavy, deliberate footsteps meant to make someone flinch. Just the steady hum of the air conditioning and the sound of our breathing. Lyric's fingers clutched the contingency file tight against her chest. "Are you sure? I'm allowed to go in?" she asked. My heart ached at the fact that her first instinct was to ask permission to enter a room bearing her name on the deed. I leaned back against the wall opposite, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel me there. "You don't need my permission," I said slowly. "But yes, I'm sure. Open it. She reached for the handle, as if it might burn her hand. When it turned easily, something flickered in her eyes, a flash of surprise, followed by a quiet, simmering anger. So it had always been this simple, and someone had worked very hard to make it feel impossible. The door swung open. Inside, the faint scent of a familiar fabric softener lingered beneath a sharper, unfamiliar perfume. Felicia's presence layered over mine. But the bones of the room were the same. The big window, the high ceiling, the bed I had paid for in cash. Lyric stepped in like she was walking into a photograph she was in, but couldn't remember ever taking. Her eyes swept the walls, the ceiling fan, the bedside table. Then they stopped at the far end of the room, where a cluster of plastic bins and taped cardboard boxes had been shoved against the wall, half hidden by a standing clothes rack. "These weren't here before," she whispered. I pushed off the wall and moved slowly toward her. "The officers pulled those down from the attic hatch," I said. "They said your things were stuffed up there with the old Christmas decorations. I asked them to bring them down and set them aside." I watched it sink in, the reality that someone had decided her entire life belonged in a crawl space above other people's heads. She walked toward the boxes, as if afraid that if she moved too fast, everything would disappear again. One bin had her name scrawled on the tape, in handwriting that wasn't hers. Another was labeled "Old Stuff," as if her memories were just clutter with no remaining value. She knelt, carefully peeling back the tape on the closest one. Inside was her wedding dress, shoved in carelessly, lace wrinkled and dulled. On top sat a small box I recognized even before she opened it. The gold comb set I'd given her on the morning of her wedding, engraved with her initials. "I thought these were gone," she whispered. She lifted one comb, her thumb tracing each letter. "LMK. He said we lost them when we moved." She set the comb down gently, then reached deeper. She pulled out a stack of notebooks, the covers worn at the edges. She flipped one open at random, her eyes skimming, then slowing. The corners of her mouth trembled. "This is the last thing I wrote, before he took the papers," she said. Back then I was scared, but I still sounded like myself. She turned the notebook toward me. On the page, in neat, steady handwriting, Lyric had written out plans for the salon, ideas for community braiding classes, a reminder to call me on Sunday. My chest tightened. If you're still here with me, and you've ever watched someone you love rediscover a younger version of themselves, forgotten in a notebook, you'll understand that strange kind of grief. Lyric hugged the notebook to her chest, then set it aside with a careful fingertip. She moved from box to box. Here, a pair of shoes she used to wear to work at the salon, the soles almost new. There, a framed wedding photo, smiles bright, eyes shining, the brim of my hat barely visible at the edge of the shot. Felicia and Omar had kept the frame, but stuffed it up here as if the version of Lyric who had dreams and plans belonged to a past that should stay hidden. "They took everything that reminded me I had a life before they showed up," she said quietly. "Not just my things, my thoughts, my plans, even my name. When he was angry, he only called me girl. She'd say that girl to the neighbors, like I wasn't even in the room." She rose and looked around the master bedroom again. I forgot what it felt like to have a door I was allowed to close, where no one had the right to walk in unless I said so. I walked to the bed, sat on the edge, and patted the space next to me. "Then remember now," I said, "this room doesn't belong to his voice or hers. It belongs to the woman whose name is on every legitimate piece of paper tied to this house." She came closer and sat down beside me, shoulders drooping, arms still wrapped around the file. Gently, I took the folder from her and set it on the nightstand. "You're not sleeping in that storage closet ever again," I said. "If you wake up in the night and reach for a mop out of habit, I'll be right here, until your body learns that fight is over." Her throat vibrated around a sound stuck between a breath and a sob. Tears finally spilled, carving 2 clean tracks down her cheeks. "I don't know how to live without listening for where he is in the house," she admitted. I don't know how to relax in a room without worrying what it'll cost me in the morning if I dare feel safe. I closed my hand over hers, the same hand that had been forced to sign too many things under someone else's weight, and squeezed firmly. "You don't have to know all of that tonight," I said. "You just have to know you're allowed to learn again." She turned her head to look at me. For the first time since I'd set foot back in Georgia, I saw a flicker of the girl she used to be. The one who used to dance around the salon after closing, sweeping hair while singing off key. She was still in there, bruised, thinner, but still there. "Mom." Her voice shook, but the words were clear. "I want to live again. Show me how." I wiped a tear from her cheek with my thumb, then guided her hand to the edge of the blanket, anchoring her to this bed, her bed. "Starting tonight," I whispered, "you're home. And if you've listened this far, if there's a lyric inside you too, a part of yourself that once got shoved into a dark corner, leave me a small heart below, hit subscribe, and turn on the notifications, so that every time I tell another story like this, you won't have to listen alone."